All right, trying another shot at this. It might cut me off because my phone has too much photos and stuff from Egypt. But basically, Alexander Hamilton was like right wing. Um, I mean, maybe you could argue he was to the left of like, I don't know, a complete absolutist or something like. But he was um, like he wanted the U.S. to have the British system of government with a hereditary monarchy, hereditary House of Lords, basically the same as the UK has. Um, and, you know, yeah, that's what he wanted. And with the British system of commerce and empire, basically, you know, a very top down, centralized, imperialistic approach. Uh, Hamilton was a mercantilist as opposed to being like Adam Smith, who was a for free trade. You know, I mean, sometimes people say Adam Smith was the founder of capitalism, and I guess if capitalism means free trade, I mean, capitalism is a pretty meaningless word because we kind of use it as if it really means something definite, but it's a very recent word. It was never used by Marx or, you know, it wasn't used really, I think, until like the 20th century, as far as I know, the way it's used now. Um, but yeah, like Adam Smith was a liberal, very liberal in a sense. Like he was kind of part of the more radical branch of liberals, you could say. Um, and he was never arguing, like he argued for free trade, but he was not arguing against socialism. He was arguing against mercantilism, which is what Alexander Hamilton supported, which is basically a country where the government controls trade. It's not socialism. It's not, I mean, like Hamilton was somebody who explicitly like hated or at least vehemently, you know, very much distrusted poor people and wanted to make sure they have no power. Um, so yeah, he wanted us to have like a central bank, the same as the one in Britain, and basically largely the same as what we have now, the Federal Reserve, uh, because he wanted basically private bankers to lend money to the government, and that would be the quote unquote central bank, which I think is basically the arrangement with the Bank of England, uh, you know, which was founded by another Scotsman. I mean, in a way, they both followed in Scottish traditions, you could say. Like Alexander Hamilton followed in the tradition of William Paterson, founder of the Bank of England and the Bank of Scotland, um, as well as following in the path of John Law, who established the first central bank in France, another Scotsman, as well as following in directly the footsteps of it was Sir James Stewart, who was a Scotsman who wrote, was the leading mercantilist theorist, basically the kind of anti-Adam Smith, who I believe Adam Smith was writing The Wealth of Nations as a response against, basically Stewart was defending the imperial system and saying how, if we just control all the trade through our special royal, corporations and this and that everything will be perfect. And Adam Smith saying that that's just going to help the people who are controlling it. Because, they weren't talking about, obviously, a democratic government at that time. And I think between them, Adam Smith would be the most in favor of a democratic government. And I don't think Adam Smith was against socialism or communism at all. Like, I've never seen anything he wrote that was against them. He was just arguing within the property system that already existed, should the government control all the trade, or should there be freedom for individuals to trade as they want to? So, and then along the way also just kind of extolling some of the benefits of commerce, when it works out well. But he was also very critical of capitalists, he used the term capitalist to mean somebody who owns capital, like basically financiers. He was very critical of them and of landlords. But anyway, so Alexander Hamilton was trying to revive this very British basically British imperialist politics in America, while the Jeffersonians were more on the side of Adam Smith and were also more open to socialism. So, he used probably the same argument that anybody can ever use for this type of banking system, where you borrow money from the bankers, you give them the power to lend you money. Like, basically, you're just indebting yourself for no reason, just like by choice. But they say that the reason to do that is because you should be indebted to the bankers, because then you'll be in their good graces. And if you're not in the good graces of the rich, then you're screwed. So you better suck up to them. So yeah, just like their whole politics is based on the idea that you got to suck up to the rich or else they'll kill us all, or something like that. So, he kind of failed. He succeeded in calling the Constitutional Convention. He succeeded in producing a somewhat conservative document. Certainly it didn't have the Bill of Rights that all the, radicals wanted. Didn't have any Bill of Rights. But so he succeeded in that sense, but he didn't succeed in restricting the franchise, like he wanted basically poor people not to be allowed to vote at the, and certainly on the federal level. They continued to be banned from voting in most of the states based on state laws, but the federal document itself doesn't set a property requirement. So he failed in that, and he certainly failed to establish a hereditary monarchy with a hereditary House of Lords. I think it was once said that, maybe it was Jefferson that said that the difference between Hamilton and John Adams was that they both wanted the British system. They both wanted the exact British government here in America for the US. But the difference is that, and this might be Jefferson being over generous to Adams here, but he said that John Adams wanted it free from its corruption, like wanted it, but not with the British corruption that was endemic to their politics, which made it a lot more aristocratic and plutocratic and autocratic than it already was. Whereas Hamilton wanted it with the corruption, that he thought it was the corruption that actually made it all work, that really ensured that no matter what they do, the poor people are never going to get any kind of power, because there's so much corruption, and there's all the legal, like, plutocracy and oligarchy and whatever in the British system, and then there's all the just ingrained corruption that it's like, I mean, here we are 200 years later or whatever, and the British still have the monarchy, still have the House of Lords. And they just did a poll today and said that like only 19% of Britons wanted to ditch the monarchy. So yeah, I mean, you get a system that's inherently, plutocratic and aristocratic and oligarchic and autocratic, and then you add on all the corruption, which amplifies that, and you have a pretty rock solid defense against any kind of democracy. So yeah, he really failed in the convention in that sense. He failed to get his hereditary monarchy and all this stuff. I mean, part of it was like, there's so many other people, they had just fought against all these things, and even though it was not explicitly stated, we are fighting to establish a republic. I mean, because that was the thing, it was divided. There were still like a lot of Whigs that had fought in the Revolution that wanted a monarchy, that just expected, well, yeah, we're gonna still have a monarchy like everybody else, right? But then there were a lot of people that were Republican from the beginning. Republican means, generally in the historic sense, like means anti-monarchy. It means you want some kind of representative government. So I think there were a lot of people that were Republican, and most of the Republicans were Democratic Republicans. They wanted to, they believed that basically the language of the Declaration of Independence and of the Constitution, that we the people are sovereign. And so anyway, Hamilton failed in that, but he still got a lot. He still got, like, what his main goal was to make sure that we had a federal government which was different from the Pennsylvania government and different from the Vermont government, because the Pennsylvania government and the Vermont government were unicameral. They were just extremely democratic. They were like the most democratic governments that had maybe existed since like the Covenanter Convention in Scotland in like 1638, or since the Iroquois Confederacy. So like, he was, they knew that the Western Massachusetts rebels were inspired by the by the Pennsylvania Constitution and the Vermont Constitution. The Pennsylvania Constitution later became like the inspiration for the French Revolutionary Constitution, or basically at around the same time, like 1789. So Hamilton and his peeps, the Federalists, they wanted to make sure that that basically the whole country wasn't taken over by democracy. They were trying to save the U.S. from democracy, make sure that democracy didn't succeed. And so they set up the Constitution. They created a very strong executive branch, which has like a lot more power than actual kings of Britain do currently, or monarchs of British monarchs apparently. Can just like, yeah, they basically, I mean, all the tyrannical tendencies of the U.S. government currently derive, or at least a lot of them derive from deliberately established, tyrannical aspects of the federal Constitution, as opposed to what we had previous to that, which was the, we had the Continental Congress, and we had the Articles of Confederation, which were put together largely by Charles Thomson, who was the secretary of the Continental Congress throughout its tenure, and I think was relatively liberal compared to the more aristocratic elements. So yeah, like during the Constitution, or during the Revolution, we had the Continental Congress was unicameral. There was only one house. The main point of having two houses in America is just to confuse people. It's just to divide people, because you give more power to the upper house, the Senate, which is based on the House of Lords. And you tend to elect the richer people to the upper house. I mean, it's basically just a wannabe House of Lords. And then you alternate between the two houses, and it's just like, it's more confusing compared to just having a unicameral system where you just have one house. You elect your people to that house and they vote, and then whoever wins. The federal system is both unicameral and monarchistic, because like in the Pennsylvania system, just like in the revolutionary Pennsylvania and Vermont constitutions, just as in the Scottish Covenanter conventions, let me just let my cat out here. Go. Sorry. So in those systems, there was no, like, the executive was literally an executive. They just execute the will of the overall body. They don't get to veto it or anything like that. Like, so that was true in Pennsylvania, that was true in Vermont, and that was true during the Covenanting movement in Scotland. And I'm sure there's been other instances of that. Those are just some of the ones I'm familiar with. But nowadays people just kind of take it for granted that our federal constitution is the way it is, and that all our state constitutions are the same, that we have a governor and then and that's technically what the president is like a governor, because a president is implies something more egalitarian, like potentially like the presiding officer, like, whereas a governor is much more directly authoritarian of a concept. Anyway, so like basically the president is a governor. It's the federal governor of the country, and they have veto over, there's like the House, which is the assembly, whatever it is, which is the normal representatives. Then there's the upper house, and this is true in almost every state constitution, every state government too. And then, so basically the upper house has a veto on the lower house. And even though it's usually less people in it, and then the executive has a veto on both of them. So it's not anything like democracy. It's very much the British Empire, I mean, just because you voted for the person or somebody, supposedly, people voted for, I mean, often people vote for somebody just to keep somebody else out, but they can argue like, okay, well, yeah, you voted for the executive, but like, why? Why do you want an executive? Why not just have an assembly? Why have an upper house? The original reason for that is because the executive is the king. They're royal blood. They have royal blood, so they're like born to rule over us, and we're just born to like accept their dominance. The upper house is because they're nobles. They're of noble blood, right? They're born to rule over us. Again, we're born to be ruled over by them. And then the House of Commons is like where other people can go. Although probably a lot of them are like descended from the nobility as well. So anyway, the point is Hamilton was a scumbag. He didn't fight against slavery. I mean, maybe he did in some instance that I'm not aware of, but in general, he's not known for that at all. And the party that he was part of, the party that he was the leader of and founder of, did not at all fight against slavery. It protected slavery. And the newspaper that was its premier kind of organ, like promoter,